I, 26 female, found out I was being stalked, 58 male, by posting to Let's Not Meet. Using a different account because I made the mistake of using a personal Reddit before. I love your show and think this could spread some good awareness, and I feel at least safe enough to finally elaborate a little. This time last year, my roommate and I started to do daily outfit checks on our Ring doorbell. For context, our apartment was one of 4 in a split-level house located in the city. We were the only apartment situated on the first floor. The front door of the house is unlocked. There is no key. It opens to a staircase that leads up, and a spiral staircase that goes downstairs. I would press the doorbell that's outside my personal door, introduce what I was wearing, and she would do the same. This went on until about December. December rolls around and I've accumulated enough clips to make a TikTok, and as we're flipping through our daily fits, there are missed rings from a man I don't recognize. I was shocked. The clips were all scary as fuck. When we looked back through recorded history to see what came before this guy, who just came into my house, it's me. He would come inside a minute after me, idle at my door and pretend to cry, hide his face, her become visibly frustrated, and then he'd leave. I was scared as fuck. I had never been scared before in my life, and that fear was palpable. I stopped walking alone at night. I stopped walking alone altogether. I stopped leaving my house. I thought I was paranoid because I live in the city, so of course he could have just been some younger, mentally ill homeless person. Or maybe he had found something of mine, or liked my dogs and had a question about them, whatever. I posted to Reddit to get some insight, and that post changed my life. I 26F think I have a stalker, or something to that effect. I was made aware that I was being naive about the whole situation, that I was literally being stalked, that this wasn't funny, that this was dangerous, and lastly that the man stalking me was naked from the waist down in 2 of the 3 videos I had posted. He was naked. I couldn't handle how embarrassing the situation was, and I stopped bringing people over to my house. I did not think the post I made would have gotten as much attention as it had. My friends had read my post before I had even told them what was going on. I received tons of messages about whether or not I was safe, about the videos I had posted, and whether or not people could do story times about what had happened to me if I had finally gone to the police. All positive messages, except one. I got a message from an account that said, "Please delete your post. I am not a stalker." Huh? Like WTF? Was he hoping this would provide me with some sort of relief? Expecting me to see that and think, oh, phew, glad that's cleared up. No. I posted to Let's Not Meet. I ended it with exactly that. Why would anyone send a message like that if you are the person the post is about? Crazy as fuck. When I went to look at the profile in question, there was that man's punk-ass face. The same face from the Ring videos. I was mortified. He had recorded a video of himself speaking at one point and posted it to a Reddit community about soccer or something, and my heart just fucking sank hearing him talk. I blocked the account and screenshotted everything I could and sent it to my school's police. They followed up with me, but because he was a stranger, there was nothing anyone could do about it besides wait for it to happen again. It doesn't. I stopped seeing him, and fast forward to July. I moved into my new house. I am fucking elated to be alive. It's July 1st, and I feel free. I'm moving in with my mom, I'm skipping and bopping around. Everything is great. July 2nd, I'm walking my dogs, and we go around the back of my house. As we're rounding a corner to make it back, there's a person on the opposite side of the sidewalk. Something about him pings in my brain, and as we walk past one another, just several feet away from me, he looks me in my eyes and smiles. I look at my friend and stop in my tracks. It's broad daylight and I've never been so angry. I look at her and I say loud enough for anyone to hear, "That's the guy who was naked at my door." He doesn't react and keeps walking. "That's the guy who found my Reddit post." Nothing. I face him completely. His back is to me and I scream, "If I ever see you here again, I will beat the fuck out of you." In hindsight, that was the worst thing I could have said, but it was mortifying. I took a picture of him and called the police. They couldn't find him. On July the 5th, he's sitting across the street from my house, waiting for my roommates and me to see him and take a photo. The police find him and tell him to stay away, but he doesn't and is right back at my damn house. They issued my emergency PPO and issued a warrant for stalking. He's arrested and bonds himself out. I feel kind of redundant, but he showed back up the same day he bonded out. I called the police and had to see the magistrate again, and they issued another warrant for felony stalking and violating a PPO. He showed up every single day, even after being arrested and being out on bond. He didn't show up to the hearing for the PPO stalking charges, which placed him in contempt of court. A fucking bounty hunter had to find him, and he's sitting in jail right now. Our court date is next week, and I just can't fucking believe this all happened. I really don't want to go through and edit this. I think airing it out could be really helpful for me, and being silent freaks me out. It's so crazy to feel safe enough to discuss this finally. My stalker disappeared after 3 horrifying years. When I was 15 years old, I lived in a rural area about 20 minutes outside of the actual town I called home. I was home from school alone one day, and a white car pulled up in front of our mailbox and stopped. I was upstairs in my room and saw from the window, but could not see who was in the car. Whoever it was sat there for several minutes without getting out of the vehicle, long enough to weird me out, and then drove away. We weren't super close in distance to our neighbors, but we weren't miles and miles apart. And I remembered that one neighbor a bit down was selling their house. I chalked it up to a potential buyer having the wrong address, or simply checking out the neighborhood, and thought nothing else of it. Fast forward about a week or so. It was a Friday night, and I had gone downtown to see the premiere of a movie with my boyfriend at the time. I remember it was a special occasion, and I had begged my parents consistently for weeks to push back my curfew so I could see this movie. Since it wouldn't be over until after 1 a.m., and it took 20 minutes to get home from town, they were reluctant but finally agreed. When the movie was over, my boyfriend Jason and I walked slowly to the truck. It was a well-lit and relatively safe area, so we stood around in the parking deck trying to push curfew for as long as possible. There weren't many vehicles at that time of night, but I realized suddenly that I recognized the one parked straight across from us, the same white car that had been at my house a week earlier. The car was running and there was a man, maybe mid-30s, sitting alone inside. I could have passed this all off as a coincidence, except as I continued to look at him, he turned his bright lights on us and spun out of the parking deck, after almost running into Jason's truck. I obviously had a horrible feeling about this and asked Jason to take me home immediately. As we pulled out of the garage, we saw the car parked across the street from the movie theater. All the lights off, the man still inside, but he didn't follow us, so we just went home a little shaken. I had no idea at that moment this was the start of 3 long and torturous years of being stalked by this man. A couple of months after the parking deck situation, the encounters became more frequent and weirder, and I hated being anywhere alone at any time. I never knew when and where I would see him, or how much time would pass between encounters. It became clear that he was watching me all the time by this point, because he only made himself known when I was alone, or with my boyfriend, never my parents, or even other friends. I became terrified, for some stupid reason, that none of my friends would believe me if I told them, so I kept it between Jason and my family. Until one day, my friend Rachel, who lived maybe 5 miles away from me, started telling me about this creepy man who showed up at her house over the weekend. Rachel's dad worked Saturdays, so she was home alone with another friend of ours, Megan. Everything was normal until around dusk when they began to smell cigarette smoke. My heart instantly began racing because by this time, this was becoming an everyday occurrence for me. I was smelling cigarette smoke, finding cigarette butts around my house, even though none of my family smoked, and could never trace the source. I had a nagging feeling, of course, that it was connected to my stalker, but I hadn't confirmed. So, as Rachel and Megan were looking for the source of the smoke, Rachel realized she had left a window in a back room open, and the smoke was coming in from the back porch. Seeing that there was a strange man on her porch, she quickly goes to close and lock the window, and, in her words, he turns around with dead eyes and looks straight through her like she wasn't really there. Megan immediately called the police, but Rachel continued to stand there, in a little bit of shock as he smirked at her and stared until his cigarette was done. He then got up and calmly walked away. The police came but found no trace of him except for cigarette butts on the porch and scattered around the backyard, indicating he had been there for quite some time. I immediately began to describe the creep to Rachel, and it was the same man. She hadn't seen or heard the white car at all, and they guessed that he had parked down the road and walked down Rachel's almost mile-long driveway or through the woods a bit. As time went on, my stories were well documented with the police department, but they had never even seen the guy. He was so good at getting away. I have to give them credit because they never doubted the truth in my stories and always showed up quickly, even as it was becoming apparent that this guy knew what he was doing and wasn't planning to be caught anytime soon. We also began to suspect he had a police scanner in his car. One night in particular, almost 2 years after the Rachel incident, Jason and I were coming home a little early from a date. My parents had gone out as well that night, and we had a strict rule that we couldn't be home alone without any adults. So Jason and I began to talk in the driveway since my dad had called, and they were only about 10 minutes away. We were too scared, given the circumstances, to get out of the truck, and we kept our eyes peeled for the creep, but we figured 10 minutes wasn't all that long. Sure as the world, not even a minute later, we saw headlights turn on in the bushes across the street from my driveway. This freak had backed his car into the bushes and waited for us to come home. Jason immediately got on the phone with the cops, and I called my dad, who is literally flying home at this point, as the man revved up his engine and flashed his lights. He then proceeded to get out of his car and walk toward Jason's truck. I will never forget that he was so slow, methodical, and emotionless. It felt like I was living out a serial killer movie. I was sobbing. We had the doors locked, of course, as the man walked up to the passenger side where I was sitting and stood only a couple of feet away from my window staring at me. He never made a move for the door. He simply stood completely still and stared. He held eye contact with me with his eyes like black holes. Jason was a baseball player and had been keeping a bat in the back seat exactly for a moment like this. He pulled me toward him and away from the window and grabbed the bat, but this man didn't even flinch. He switched his gaze to the bat for a few seconds, smiled with a huge and disgusting grin, walked back to his car and drove away. It seemed like 40 minutes passed, but it couldn't have been more than 5 because the man was gone for a couple of minutes before my dad came into our driveway doing like 80 mamifero. The cops never caught up to him. There were many more stories of torture, such as leaving dead animals outside of our front door and shining flashlights into our windows in the middle of the night. But nothing anyone did could trip this guy up. My family had tried everything. My older brother had even desperately tried to chase the guy through the woods behind our house one night and lost him. The police wanted to help, but they only had my stories and the corroboration of my boyfriend, Rachel's encounter, and one kind of vague sighting of the car in town. I didn't even have a name for anyone to file a restraining order against, not that it would have done me any good. And maybe the creepiest part of all of this, in 3 whole years, he never spoke a single word. Then one day, just as quickly as he showed up, every single trace of him completely disappeared. Just like that. I never knew if he died, was arrested for some other crime, or just lost interest, even though that seemed highly unlikely. I simply never saw him again, and it has now been 10 years. Creeps come in all shapes and forms and many times do not look like what you see in the movies. They can seem completely normal on the outside. However, this man's behavior was exactly like something from a horror film. Something in his eyes was so evil it would turn your stomach. Over the course of 3 years, he made my life extremely stressful and terrifying. And even now that I live in a different state, I sometimes halfway expect him to show up again. I still occasionally feel the lasting effects of that time, but thankfully, life has become pretty normal again. Needless to say, the disturbed stalker who made me miserable for years, let's not meet. Bonus story. Just this year, I was scouring YouTube for creepy stories as one does and came across something about a true stalker story by a female YouTuber I wasn't familiar with. My stomach turned. Her story was almost identical to mine, down to the cigarette butts in her yard, the description of his empty eyes, and his white car. I knew in my heart it was the same guy. So I did a little research on this girl. She is the same age as me. The weird events began when she was 15. And she grew up just one town over from me. I was floored. I reached out to her, but haven't heard back yet. I'll gladly update here if I do. If you're enjoying this so far, a like and subscribe would mean the world and help this channel grow. Let me know in the comments which story stayed with you the most. Now let's continue. Nothing I eat tastes right. There were 3 of us living in a house share situation. It was me and my friend Kieran from college and Simon, who was slightly older than us. Me and Kieran were fresh from college, and though we had intended to live by ourselves, we quickly got a big dose of reality and realized it wouldn't be feasible on our salaries. Thankfully, we met Simon through a friend of a friend, and the 3 of us found a pretty cheap place. I can't say we ever really hit it off with Simon. There was nothing we disliked about the guy, but even after living with him for over a year, we knew next to nothing about him. One thing we did figure out pretty quickly was that Simon rarely left the house. Kieran put a word to that: agoraphobic. Simon would go out maybe once every week, or every 2 weeks, for groceries, but he would never be gone for more than an hour. People have told me since that this would have been an issue for them, having someone always hovering around and stuff, being in your face 24/7 for as long as you're home. But it wasn't really like that. Simon was pretty courteous about our space, and whatever hang-ups he had, he never made them our problem. Besides, he was paying to live there too, so he had every right to spend as much time indoors as he wanted. The rent was always on time, and Simon kept a well-stocked pantry, so we assumed he had a job, something he could do from his desk. Computers, maybe? That was how little we knew about him. We didn't even know what he did for a living. Simon was kind of a neat freak. Actually, Kieran had a word for this too, but I've forgotten it. Me and Kieran, I were slobs, so we always felt guilty when we'd come home and find the kitchen surfaces scrubbed, or the bathroom spotless and the towels folded. Simon was a good influence on us because we ended up feeling so bad about it that we forced ourselves to get more on top of our chores. But he always said that he never minded. One of the only times he ever referenced his agoraphobia in conversation was when he told us, "I stay all day indoors. What else am I meant to do? I'll get bored if there's nothing to clean." I think he was only half joking. Another thing about his sort of neatness or attention to detail or whatever was that there was very little deviation in his routine. Whenever you heard him moving about in the house, he was doing things like clockwork. More than a couple of times, I was woken up by the sound of the toilet flushing and realized I was running late for work because Simon always used the bathroom at 8:30 in the morning, every day. Simon ate pretty much the same things every day, and he had 3 outfits which he would wear in rotation. We would ask him if it didn't drive him crazy that his life was like Groundhog Day, and he would just shrug it off and smile. He was never overly anal or obsessive toward us. He wasn't sociable, but he could hold a conversation. There were opportunities where he could have, and rightly should have, given us hell, particularly when we had friends over and things got loud late at night. But he never did. Overall, he was a nice roommate. 2 months before his disappearance was when Simon's behavior really started to take a turn for the worse. He started coming into the communal areas less and less, especially in the evenings when we would normally all be in there together, doing our own separate things. We started to see him cook meals less and less as well, and you could tell just by looking at him that something wasn't right. He was getting thinner, almost scarily so, and his skin was starting to deteriorate. I remember he had some really bad zits, which were unusual for him, because he was normally so well groomed and had never been prone to acne from what I saw. Still, me and Kieran said nothing. I regret this now, but like I said, we weren't exactly close with Simon, and both of us felt too awkward to ask if anything was wrong. In our minds, we just hoped he had the flu, and that normalcy would soon resume. I remember seeing him in the kitchen around this time, and the minute he entered, his face completely changed. The muscles in his neck went taut, and he seemed extremely on edge. He was staring at the microwave as if it were about to leap from the counter and bite his head off. I gave him a gentle, "You good?" And as if a switch had flicked, some of the color returned to his cheeks, and he nodded and gave me a half-hearted grin. This was one of the last times I saw him. A couple of weeks later, he came home from a trip to the grocery store, trips he had been taking less and less frequently and always returning with fewer items, wearing a brand new bright red woolly hat, pulled all the way down to his eyebrows. This was so unusual for him and looked so ridiculous paired with the same formal clothes we had seen him wearing for a year, that me and Kieran burst into nervous laughter immediately at the sight of him. He was obviously so uncomfortable, ashamed even, but didn't take it off, and me and Kieran stopped laughing and gave him a few lame compliments. I only saw him twice more after this, and both times he was wearing the hat, dirty as if he hadn't taken it off. Kieran also claims that Simon wore this around the house at all times. The last time I saw Simon, it was late at night, and I could hear him crying in the bathroom. I lingered outside the door, shifting my weight from foot to foot, unsure of whether to knock. I'd never heard him cry, and I'd never heard anyone cry like that. Before I could make up my mind, Simon came out wearing his red hat. He had a black eye, and there were still tears on his face. I opened my mouth to say something, but he had already crossed the hallway and locked himself in his room. Seriously concerned and kicking myself that I hadn't taken the opportunity to find out what was wrong. When I still had the chance, we began sending Simon frequent text messages, now the only way we were able to communicate with him. None of these would get any reply. We could only assume he was still in his room. Often, we would hear him shifting around in there, but his routine seemed to have flown completely out of the window. To my knowledge, he never came out to use the kitchen or bathroom. One night, Kieran woke me up. He had the smell of booze on his breath. I think it had been his sister's birthday or something, so he had been out drinking. Kieran told me that he had been sitting on the couch, having just fixed himself a snack, when a man came down the stairs, glanced at him once, grinned, then opened the door and vanished into the night. Kieran said that, at first, he thought the man was Simon, since they had the same hair color and the man was wearing Simon's clothes. In the few split seconds that they had been in the room together before the man had left the house, Kieran had done a double take before realizing that the man had a completely different face and was not Simon. Kieran prefaced all this by asking me if I had friends over. When I said I didn't, he asked if Simon had any friends over. I didn't know for sure, but I shook my head no, and Kieran accepted this automatically. Simon had never had any guests around during the full time we lived together. He also never spoke about any friends. When I thought of that, a pang of guilt hit me as I again pictured Simon emerging from the bathroom crying, with his eye all swollen and bruised. This was quickly erased from my mind though, as Kieran told me what he saw. We wondered if the man had been a burglar and if we had been robbed, so we got up and checked everything, but no valuables were missing. We texted Simon a couple of times, but there was no reply once again, and his bedroom door remained closed and locked. I weakly tried to pull Kieran round to the conclusion that the man he saw had, in fact, been Simon, and he was just so wasted that he hadn't seen Simon's face properly. Even as I said it, it didn't sound right. Simon never left the house at night. Kieran was also adamant, between burps and swaying on his feet unsteadily, that the man he had seen was not Simon. We eventually knocked on Simon's door loud enough to wake him up if he had been sleeping in there, and when there was still no answer, we had to assume, however improbable, that Simon had gone off somewhere and was not home. We were both pretty uneasy, and though Kieran slumped right off to bed, I stayed awake all night, listening for the key in the lock and for Simon's return. 2 days later, with still no return and no text messages, we decided to pick the lock to Simon's room, now worried that there really had been a burglar, and that Simon might have been incapacitated or murdered. Neither Kieran nor I had ever been inside Simon's room, and when we entered, my heart kind of broke for him. Simon had next to nothing in there. There was a single lamp and a Polaroid camera on the bedside table, and nothing more. His computer sat at his desk with nothing around it. There were 2 tatty old paperbacks on a shelf above the desk, as well as the leather journal that we had seen him make to-do lists in. There was nothing else in the room. No posters on the wall, no trinkets, no mess. The bedsheets were crisp, the bed had been neatly made up, and lying on one of the pillows was the red hat. Simon was not in there. We debated what to do for a while, and I took down Simon's notebook. He was meticulous in his record keeping, and we flipped through what must have been around 50 pages, with things written on them like, change bedsheets today, bleach shower, or vacuum hallway. He also noted his shopping lists and how much he spent on groceries. There was always a date in the margin next to his notes. We flipped through until we came to the last few pages that were filled. The first thing out of the ordinary was a line of text by itself with no date, scrawled rapidly and then quickly scratched out so that the writing was barely visible. It read, "Nothing I eat tastes right." The next page was much more composed and began again with a date in the margin. Bread slightly off, tap water slightly off, meat, chicken, fine, cereal bar, fine, tomato, way off, lettuce slightly off. There was his to-do list. The next instance of this, milk way off, eggs fine, pasta plain, fine, bolognese sauce, slightly off, meat, beef, slightly off, banana slightly off. His to-do list, his grocery expenses, meat, chicken, way off, tap water way off, banana fine, ham slices way off, frozen pizza slightly off. It went on like this, with a date attached. My computer screen is too dark. Bread toasted way off, butter way off, eggs slightly off, cheese fine, banana way off. For pages and pages, until all the foods he was mentioning were listed as way off. The bathroom is bigger, he wrote. The ceiling in the kitchen has changed color, now off-white. Simon's whole world had been this house, the route he took to the grocery store, and the same several foods he ate. The same things on repeat. I would trust him to know if something was even slightly off, if there was even an imperceptible change. The hallway is wider. Cereal bar, way off. The microwave in the kitchen has moved a few centimeters to the right. The carpet doesn't feel the same. Something smells terrible and I can't figure out what it is. Shower X2 today. Eggs way off. Curtains took longer to close than usual. Not my thought. The inside of the fridge smells strange. Missed a step climbing the stairs. Couch is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable to write with the left hand. The bathroom has grown bigger by a few centimeters. The ceiling is higher. Not my thought. Cheese way off. Took the wrong left turn on the way to the grocery store. Couldn't remember the word for aggrieved. Not mine. Put kitchen utensils back in the wrong place. Got lost on the way home. Not my thought. The bathroom has grown bigger again. Didn't recognize the room when I woke up. Forgot password to computer. Way off, way off, way off. And not my thought. The final thing Simon had written, with no date and in handwriting so shaky that it was almost illegible, though it had been deteriorating for the last few pages, was, I have nothing. I don't understand why it wants to be me. Should I be happy that something is jealous enough of even my small life that it wants to push me out? Me and Kieran silently freaked. I hefted the notebook and flipped through the last few pages to see if anything else was written, but every page that followed was blank. When it came to the final page, 5 Polaroids slid out and fell to the floor. Kieran scooped them up and we examined them. Each was a portrait of Simon, presumably taken by himself in front of a plain white wall, probably one of the walls in his bedroom. The photos were all dated, having been taken a little over a week apart from each other. The first photo was how I now remember him, sallow-faced with sunken eyes and a few angry red zits on his face. The second photo showed Simon with very little change. Apart from that, the zit near his hairline, just shy of his right temple, had grown bigger and almost looked like a boil. In the third photo, the zit had swelled threefold and now resembled a lump or a tumor or something. It covered half of his forehead. Simon's skin was pale, his eyes were dark. In the fourth photo, the lump had swelled to the size of a saucer. It had a few hairs growing from it, and its surface was uneven. It had a sizable dimple in its center. The pressure of this mass had caused Simon's right eye to bruise. His eyelid was purple and swollen. In the fifth and final photo, Simon's right eye had completely swelled shut. It looked as if it had been uncomfortably squashed into the crook of his nose, which also appeared broken, and pointed to the left. His mouth was contorted into a painful grimace. The lump had a new shape to it, the bump of something that looked like a nose, complete with a nostril. The curve of what could be described as a lip, with a slight pink color. Unmistakably, a circular swell with wrinkles and creases, and eyelashes growing from the center of it. We called the police. We showed them the photos. We described what we'd seen, the man who left the house in Simon's place. We told them how Simon had acted in the past few months, compared to the rigid routine that we had grown accustomed to. They read from his journal. Nothing came of it, of course. Simon was never found. They came to the consensus that, with his history of disordered behavior, it was likely that he'd had a breakdown of some description, and that we should assume the worst. We found out in the coming weeks that Simon had no family and few contacts from the outside world. Me and Kieran live with his sister and her girlfriend now. Sometimes I ask him, not for the first time, to describe the man who left the house that night, but Kieran's always hazy on the details. I'm at the point now where I'm almost sure we'll never see Simon again, but this other man, or this thing, if I pass him on the street, or see him in line at the movies, if he has friends, if it keeps a diary or a routine, I want to think that some part of me will know that it's him. I don't know what I'll do, but part of me thinks that I'll know him, leading the life that should have been Simon's. He will be familiar, but slightly off. I will look at it and get a sense that I've seen it before, even if he has become completely unrecognizable. Had an incredibly frightening experience last night and wanted to know if anyone here has ever had a similar encounter. So last night, I was at a classmate's house working on a group project we have due tomorrow. I live in an apartment in the town where our university is located, and my classmate lives at his parents' house, which is in the foothills just outside of town. In order to get to the house, you have to drive along a relatively secluded and narrow 2-lane road for about 5-6 miles. We started working on the project at about 6 p.m, and I ended up hanging around for a while after we had finished our work. So, I left his house pretty late, at about 11, and started down the road back towards town. I didn't realize how tough it would be to navigate the road at night. There were no streetlights, and the road was unkept and riddled with potholes. On top of this, I had no cell service, so I had to drive very slowly to make sure I didn't blow out one of my tires since I had used my spare a couple of weeks back. I figure I was about 3 miles from the house when I rounded a tight corner and saw a pickup truck with a camper shell parked diagonally across the road. The manner in which it was parked completely impeded my path, and I couldn't drive around it because there was a gully on both sides of the road. The only way for me to go at this point was backward, where there was a pull-off that I could use to turn my car around. At first, I couldn't see inside the cab, but when I turned on my high beams, I saw that there was a man slouched over in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel, as if he had been knocked out after a bad accident. I immediately sensed something was wrong. The way his car had just coincidentally come to rest in a position that totally blocked the road was a big red flag for me. I had heard stories of people playing dead in the road as a way to lure unsuspecting people out of their cars so they could rob them. I decided fuck this shit and elected to go back to my classmate's house and explain what was going on. I threw the car into reverse and kept my eyes darting back and forth between my rear view and the truck. I looked and saw that I was almost to the pull-off where I could turn around. When I looked back, my heart skipped about 5 beats. The man who had been slouched over in the driver's seat was now walking towards my car at a hurried pace, while a few other men jumped out of the camper shell and started moving towards me as well. I panicked and accelerated backwards into the pull-off, which messed up the undercarriage of my car pretty badly. As I put it into drive, the guy was already at my passenger side door, tugging on the handle which, thank the Lord, was locked. I only caught a brief glimpse of him, but his face appeared to be scabbed and leathery, definitely a meth head or some sort of drug abuser. I sped away and didn't slow down at all until I reached the house, constantly checking my rear view to see if they were following. Thankfully, they didn't tail me, and when I reached the house, I explained what had happened to my classmate, and we called the cops. I was grateful that my buddy's parents were kind enough to let me stay the night. They didn't find anyone on the road matching the description, but I filed an incident report, and they told me they would be on the lookout for similar vehicles and suspicious activity. But holy shit, I'm still so shook up over it. I keep getting the same adrenaline rush I got when I saw the guy charging me whenever I think about it. Please share similar experiences you've had, as I would appreciate a good read or a good discussion to help clear my headspace. If you made it to the end, you're braver than most. Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. More disturbing stories are waiting. I'll see you next time.